The marble floor felt cold against my knees as I crouched down, carefully threading electrical wire through the outlet box in the pristine office lobby. My tools were spread out neatly beside me, each one placed with the precision that comes from 20 years of contractor work. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished stone. That is when the glass doors exploded open behind me. "Excuse me, excuse-me." The voice cut through the lobby like a chainsaw through silk. I looked up to see a woman in a designer suit marching toward me, her heels clicking against the marble with military precision. Her face was twisted with the kind of rage that only comes from someone who has never been told no. "You cannot be here doing this work without proper authorization," she screamed, pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal. "I am calling security right now. You are fired from this building." I remained crouched on the floor, watching her face turn red with fury. She had no idea that she was screaming at the person who had just purchased the entire building 3 weeks ago. She had no idea that her moment of power was about to become the biggest mistake of her life. "My name is Marcus, and I have been working as an electrical contractor for the past 2 decades. That morning started like any other. I arrived at the Pinnacle office complex at 7 a.m. sharp, just as I had done every Tuesday for the past 3 months. The building management company had hired me to update all the electrical outlets in the main lobby, a job that required precision and attention to detail. I took pride in my work. Every wire was measured perfectly, every connection tested twice, every tool cleaned and organized. The other contractors who worked this building knew me as the guy who never cut corners and always showed up on time. The security guards would wave and sometimes bring me coffee. Even the office workers had started to recognize me, nodding politely when they passed through the lobby on their way to work. But this woman had never seen me before. She stood over me now, her shadow blocking the morning sunlight. Up close, I could see the expensive jewelry, the perfectly styled hair, the kind of manicured nails that had never touched a day of real work. Everything about her screamed entitlement and privilege. "I asked you a question," she continued, her voice echoing through the lobby. "Who authorized this work? Where is your supervisor?" I set down my wire strippers and looked up at her calmly. "Ma'am, I have been contracted by the building management company to perform electrical updates. I have all the proper permits and authorization." "That is impossible," she snapped. "I am Linda Westbrook, president of the Maple Heights Homeowners Association. This building affects our community, and all work must be approved through proper channels. You are clearly here without permission." The irony was not lost on me. Linda Westbrook had been making my life miserable for weeks without even knowing it. Her HOA office was located in the residential complex next door, and she had been filing complaint after complaint about everything from noise levels to parking arrangements. What she did not understand was that her complaints all came across my desk now, because I owned the building she was complaining about. "Ma'am, I assure you that I have proper authorization," I repeated, keeping my voice steady and professional. "Do not lie to me." Linda's voice was reaching a fever pitch now. Other people in the lobby had stopped what they were doing to stare. "I know unauthorized work when I see it. This is exactly the kind of unprofessional behavior that has been plaguing this area." She pulled out her phone and started dialing. "Security. Yes, I need someone in the main lobby immediately. There is an unauthorized contractor here who refuses to leave. He may be trespassing." My hands remained steady as I continued organizing my tools. 20 years of dealing with difficult customers had taught me patience, but something about Linda Westbrook was different. This was not just someone having a bad day. This was someone who genuinely believed that her authority extended to places where she had no power at all. "You need to pack up your little tools and get out of this building immediately," she said, hanging up her phone. "When security gets here, I am going to make sure they escort you out personally. People like you think you can just show up anywhere and do whatever you want." The security guard who arrived was Tom Rodriguez, a man I had shared dozens of conversations with over the past few months. His face showed confusion as he approached us. "Tom," Linda barked before he could speak, "this man is trespassing and performing unauthorized work. I need him removed from the building immediately." Tom looked at me, then back at Linda. "Ma'am, I am going to need to see some identification and find out what authority you have to make this request." "Authority?" Linda's voice went up another octave. "I am Linda Westbrook. I am the president of Maple Heights HOA. This building directly impacts our community." What happened next changed everything. Linda looked directly at me, her eyes filled with contempt and superiority. "You are fired from this building. Do you hear me? Fired. Pack up your junk and never come back." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Everyone in the lobby was staring now. Tom looked uncomfortable. A few office workers had their phones out, probably recording the scene. But Linda Westbrook had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea that she had just publicly humiliated and fired the person who owned every square inch of the building she was standing in. As I slowly packed my tools into their case, I made a decision that would change both of our lives forever. To understand what happened next, you need to know how I got to that moment on the marble floor. The story begins 5 years ago, when I was barely keeping my small electrical contracting business afloat. I was working out of a rented garage, driving a 15-year-old truck, and sometimes choosing between paying rent or buying groceries. The economic downturn had hit small contractors hard. Big companies were underbidding everyone, and property owners were delaying maintenance projects. There were nights when I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid invoices and overdue bills, wondering if I should just give up and get a regular job working for someone else. But I had learned something important during those dark months. I had learned to pay attention to real estate. When you work inside dozens of different buildings every month, you start to notice patterns. You see which properties are well-maintained and profitable, and which ones are struggling. You learn to read the signs of a good investment. The Pinnacle office complex had caught my attention immediately. The building was only 10 years old, constructed with high-quality materials, and located in one of the fastest-growing business districts in the city. The tenants were stable, long-term businesses, and the rental rates were consistently high. But more importantly, I could see that the current owners were not managing it properly. Small maintenance issues were being ignored until they became expensive problems. The electrical systems were outdated and inefficient. The common areas were clean but not impressive. It was a premium building being run like a budget property, which meant there was enormous potential for someone who knew what they were doing. So I started planning. Every spare dollar went into a special investment account. I studied property management, learned about commercial real estate financing, and began building relationships with local investors. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, saving every penny I could. The breakthrough came 18 months ago, when I landed a contract to update the electrical systems in 3 major office buildings. The job paid well, but more importantly, it connected me with Richard Chen, a successful real estate investor who was impressed with my work ethic and attention to detail. "Marcus," he told me over lunch one day, "you have something most contractors do not have. You understand buildings from the inside out. You see problems before they become disasters. That is exactly what I look for in a business partner. Richard introduced me to his investment group, and together we began looking for the right opportunity. When the Pinnacle office complex went up for sale 8 months ago, I knew it was perfect. The asking price was reasonable because the current owners were tired of dealing with maintenance issues and tenant complaints. What they saw as problems, I saw as opportunities. The purchase process took 4 months of negotiations, inspections, and financing arrangements. Richard's group provided most of the capital, but I contributed my savings and became a full partner in the ownership. More importantly, I was designated as the managing partner, which meant I had complete authority over day-to-day operations. 3 weeks ago, the deal finally closed. I was now part owner of a $1.2 million commercial property in the heart of the business district. But instead of announcing my new position or hiring a management company, I made a different choice. I decided to continue working as a contractor in the building. This decision was not about saving money or keeping my old job. It was about understanding my investment from every possible angle. I wanted to know exactly what needed to be fixed, which tenants had legitimate concerns, and how the building operated on a daily basis. I wanted to earn the respect of the people who worked there before I revealed my true role. But there was another reason for my decision. For 20 years, I had been treated like I was invisible by people in expensive suits who looked down on contractors and maintenance workers. I had been talked down to, dismissed, and treated like my opinions did not matter. I wanted to see how people behaved when they thought I had no power. Linda Westbrook had just given me exactly the demonstration I was looking for. As I walked out of the lobby that morning, carrying my tools and my wounded pride, I was already planning my response. But this was not going to be about revenge or getting even. This was going to be about justice, accountability, and teaching someone an important lesson about treating people with respect. Linda Westbrook thought she had fired a contractor. What she had actually done was declare war on someone who now had the power to fight back. That night, I sat in my home office and began researching everything I could find about Linda Westbrook and the Maple Heights Homeowners Association. What I discovered was going to make the confrontation even more satisfying than I had imagined. Linda Westbrook had left quite a paper trail. Within 2 hours of basic internet research, I had found her LinkedIn profile, her HOA website biography, and several local news articles that mentioned her involvement in various community disputes. But the real treasure trove came from the complaint files that had been forwarded to me as the new building owner. In the past 6 months alone, Linda had filed 47 separate complaints about the Pinnacle office complex. 47. The complaints ranged from noise violations to parking disputes to accusations of code violations that did not actually exist. Each complaint required responses, investigations, and documentation. The previous owners had spent thousands of dollars in legal and administrative costs trying to address her endless stream of grievances. But as I read through the complaints more carefully, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Linda was not just filing complaints. She was using her position as HOA president to intimidate and manipulate people who could not fight back. One complaint involved a food truck that operated in the parking lot on Fridays. Linda had demanded that the building owners ban the truck, claiming it violated health codes and created unfair competition for restaurants in her residential complex. When the building owners refused, Linda had called the health department, the city zoning office, and even the fire marshal to try to shut down the truck. The food truck owner was an elderly man named Carlos, who had been serving lunch to office workers for 3 years without a single violation or complaint. Another complaint involved the building's landscaping service. Linda had demanded that they stop using leaf blowers before 9 a.m., claiming the noise was disturbing her residential community. When the landscaping company explained that they had to start early to avoid disrupting business hours, Linda had threatened to file noise ordinance violations and have their business license revoked. The landscaping company was a small family business that employed 12 people. But the complaint that made my blood boil involved Sarah Martinez, a single mother who worked as a cleaning contractor in the building. Linda had accused Sarah of stealing office supplies and demanded that she be banned from the property. The accusation was completely false, but it had cost Sarah 2 weeks of work while the building management investigated. Sarah had 3 children and was studying nursing at night school. Those 2 weeks of lost income had forced her to choose between paying rent and buying groceries for her kids. The more I read, the clearer it became that Linda Westbrook was not just entitled and rude. She was a bully who used her position of authority to destroy people who could not defend themselves. She targeted contractors, service workers, and small business owners because she knew they did not have the resources to fight back against someone with her connections and legal threats. But Linda had made one crucial mistake in her pattern of harassment. She had been filing her complaints under the assumption that she had some kind of legal authority over the Pinnacle office complex. In several of her letters, she had claimed to represent the interests of the broader community and had demanded meetings with building management to discuss ongoing operations. The truth was that Linda Westbrook had absolutely no legal authority over the Pinnacle office complex. Her HOA only governed the residential community next door. The office building was on separate property with separate ownership and separate zoning. Linda had been pretending to have power that she did not possess, and the previous building owners had been too intimidated or too busy to challenge her claims. I spent the next week documenting everything. I made copies of all 47 complaints. I researched the legal boundaries between the HOA property and the office complex. I contacted Carlos, the food truck owner, and Sarah Martinez to hear their stories firsthand. I even drove through the Maple Heights residential community to see what kind of neighborhood Linda was supposedly protecting. What I found was a typical suburban development with neat lawns, 2-car garages, and houses that probably cost more than most people make in 5 years. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood where someone like Linda Westbrook would thrive, surrounded by rules and regulations that she could use to control her neighbors. But I also discovered something else. Linda had been using her HOA position to demand free services from local businesses. She had convinced a landscaping company to maintain her personal property by threatening to have them banned from working in the neighborhood. She had pressured a local restaurant to cater HOA events at cost by claiming she could influence their permit renewals. She had even demanded free electrical work from another contractor by threatening to spread negative reviews if he refused. Linda Westbrook was not just a bully. She was running what amounted to a small-scale extortion operation, using fear and intimidation to get what she wanted from people who depended on community goodwill for their livelihoods. As I sat in my office late that Friday night, surrounded by documents and evidence, I realized that Linda had given me something much more valuable than a simple opportunity for revenge. She had given me the chance to protect every contractor, service worker, and small business owner who had been victimized by her abuse of power. The confrontation I was planning was not just about getting even. It was about stopping a pattern of harassment that had been going on for years. Linda Westbrook thought she had fired a powerless contractor. What she had actually done was awakening someone who now had both the authority and the evidence to hold her accountable for everything she had done. The next phase of my plan was going to be very satisfying indeed. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. in the building's main conference room. I had sent formal invitations to all the tenants, explaining that the new building ownership wanted to address ongoing management issues and hear concerns directly from the people who worked there every day. What I did not mention in the invitation was that I was the new owner. As far as the tenants knew, they were meeting with a representative of the ownership group to discuss building operations. I wanted to hear their honest opinions about the problems they had been facing, particularly the harassment they had been receiving from Linda Westbrook. The conference room on the third floor was perfect for what I had planned. It had a long mahogany table that could seat 20 people, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, and a formal atmosphere that would make everything that happened feel official and important. By 2 o'clock, 16 people had gathered around the table. There were representatives from the accounting firm, the law office, the marketing agency, and several other businesses that rented space in the building. Sarah Martinez was there, representing the cleaning contractors. Even Carlos, the food truck owner, had been invited to discuss the harassment he had been receiving. I stood at the head of the table in my best suit, looking every inch the professional building manager. Thank you all for coming today. As you know, this building has recently changed ownership, and we want to address some ongoing issues that have been affecting your ability to work here comfortably. Before we begin, I continued, I want to assure you that everything discussed in this room will remain confidential, and there will be no retaliation for any concerns you choose to share. That was when the conference room door burst open. Linda Westbrook stormed in like she owned the place, wearing a navy blue power suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people make in a month. Her face was already flushed with anger, and she had not even heard what the meeting was about yet. "Excuse me," she announced to the room. "I am Linda Westbrook, president of the Maple Heights Homeowners Association. I was not informed about this meeting, which is completely unacceptable given my position in this community." The room fell silent. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Sarah Martinez looked down at the table, clearly afraid of another confrontation with the woman who had cost her 2 weeks of work. I remained calm and professional. "Ms. Westbrook, this is a private meeting for building tenants to discuss internal operations. I am not sure how you learned about it, but I am afraid you were not invited." "Not invited?" Linda's voice went up an octave. "I have been working with the management of this building for months to address ongoing issues that affect our entire community. I have every right to be here." She walked around the table and pulled out an empty chair, sitting down without being asked. "In fact, I insist on being here. The decisions made in this room directly impact the Maple Heights community, and as president of the HOA, I have a responsibility to represent our interests." I could see the other people in the room exchanging glances. Some looked annoyed, others looked uncomfortable, but everyone seemed resigned to the fact that Linda was going to take over the meeting. "Ms. Westbrook," I said carefully, "I appreciate your concern for your community, but this meeting is specifically for people who work in this building. Perhaps we could schedule a separate meeting to discuss any concerns your HOA might have." "Absolutely not." Linda slammed her hand on the table. "I have been dealing with problems from this building for months, and I am tired of being ignored. The noise, the traffic, the unauthorized work, the code violations, all of these issues need to be addressed immediately." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I have documentation of 47 separate violations and complaints that need immediate attention. The previous management company was completely incompetent, but I expect better from new ownership. The room was getting tense. I could see that Linda was building up to one of her signature performances, and the other people at the table were preparing to be lectured by someone who had no actual authority over any of them. Furthermore, Linda continued, I want to make it clear that all future building operations must be approved through proper channels. That means consulting with community leaders like myself before making decisions that affect the neighborhood. She looked directly at me. I also want to discuss the unauthorized contractor work that has been going on. Last week, I personally had to have an unauthorized electrician removed from this building. That kind of unprofessional behavior cannot be tolerated. My heart rate remained steady, but I could feel the moment approaching when everything would change. Linda was digging her own grave deeper with every word, building her claims of authority higher and higher. The truth is, Linda said, standing up now and addressing the room like she was giving a speech, this building needs proper oversight. It needs someone who understands community standards and professional expectations. It needs leadership. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. I am prepared to take on that responsibility. Effective immediately, I am declaring myself the interim community liaison for all building operations. Any decisions about maintenance, contractors, tenant policies, or operational changes must be approved through me. The silence in the room was deafening. Linda had just claimed complete authority over a building she did not own, in front of witnesses, with documented evidence. It was exactly what I had been hoping she would do. I stood up slowly, reached into my briefcase, and pulled out a legal document. The time had come to show Linda Westbrook exactly who she had been talking to. Ms. Westbrook, I said, my voice calm and measured, before you take on that responsibility, I think there is something you should know. I placed the legal document on the table in front of me. The letterhead was clearly visible, Pinnacle Office Complex Deed of Ownership. Linda glanced down at it, and I could see the first flicker of confusion cross her face. 3 weeks ago, I continued, this building was purchased by Pinnacle Property Holdings, LLC. I am Marcus Thompson, and I am the managing partner of that organization, which means, Ms. Westbrook, that I am the owner of this building. The words landed like a physical blow. Linda's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror as she began to understand what I was saying. That is impossible, she whispered. You are just a contractor. You were doing electrical work in the lobby. I saw you on your knees with your tools. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out several more documents. The purchase agreement, the title transfer, the LLC registration papers. I spread them across the mahogany table like cards in a poker game. You are correct, Ms. Westbrook. I am a contractor. I have been working as an electrical contractor for 20 years, but I am also a businessman, an investor, and as of 3 weeks ago, the owner of the building you just claimed authority over. The room was absolutely silent. Everyone was staring at the documents, then at me, then at Linda. Sarah Martinez had her hand over her mouth. Carlos was shaking his head in amazement. The representatives from the various businesses looked like they were watching a car accident in slow motion. Linda picked up one of the documents with trembling hands. Her face was now completely white, and I could see the panic beginning to set in as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. This has to be some kind of fraud, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Contractors do not buy office buildings. This is impossible." "Ms. Westbrook," I said, my voice growing firmer, "not only did you publicly humiliate me in the lobby last week, calling me unauthorized and having me escorted out of my own building, but you just spent the last 10 minutes claiming authority over property that you have absolutely no legal connection to." I walked around the table until I was standing directly across from her. "You filed 47 complaints about this building in the past 6 months. 47. You cost the previous owners thousands of dollars in legal and administrative fees responding to your harassment. You threatened Carlos here with false health code violations. You cost Sarah 2 weeks of work with false theft accusations. You have been using your HOA position to intimidate people who depend on community goodwill for their livelihood." Linda's hands were shaking now. The folder of complaints had fallen open and papers were scattered across the table. "I was just doing my job," she said weakly. "I was protecting my community." "Your community." I picked up a property survey map and placed it in front of her. "Ms. Westbrook, your HOA has absolutely no jurisdiction over this building. We are on separate property with separate zoning and separate ownership. You have been claiming authority that you do not possess and never possessed." The other people in the room were beginning to understand what they were witnessing. This was not just a case of mistaken identity or a simple misunderstanding. This was someone who had been systematically abusing their position of power, finally being confronted by someone who had the authority to stop them. "Furthermore," I continued, "your behavior toward me last week was not just rude or unprofessional. It was discriminatory. You saw a man in work clothes and immediately assumed he did not belong here. You made no effort to verify my authorization or speak to building management. You simply decided that someone who looked like a working person must be trespassing." Linda tried to stand up, but her legs seemed unsteady. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I did not know. If I had known you were the owner, I never would have." "Exactly," I cut her off. "You never would have treated the owner that way, but you felt perfectly comfortable treating a contractor that way. You felt entitled to humiliate someone you thought had no power to fight back." The truth of what I was saying was written all over her face. Linda Westbrook had built her entire identity around wielding power over people she considered beneath her. She had never learned to treat people with basic respect because she had never faced consequences for her behavior. "I want to apologize," she said desperately. "I was completely wrong. I will withdraw all my complaints. I will never interfere with building operations again. Please, can we just forget this whole thing happened?" But it was too late for apologies. Linda had made her choices, and now she was going to face the consequences. "Ms. Westbrook," I said formally, "effective immediately, you are banned from this property. You have no legal authority here, you have no business purpose here, and your pattern of harassment toward my tenants and contractors ends today." I looked around the room at the other people who had been victims of her bullying. "I want everyone here to know that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Anyone who tries to intimidate or harass people who work in this building will be dealt with appropriately." Linda gathered up her scattered papers with shaking hands. Her face was red with humiliation, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. But instead of leaving quietly, she made the decision that would transform her embarrassing mistake into a criminal matter. "This is not over," she said, her voice rising again. "I am going to sue you for fraud, for discrimination, for harassment. I am going to have your business license revoked. I am going to make sure everyone in this community knows what kind of person you really are." She pointed her finger directly at my face. "You think you have won, but you have no idea who you are dealing with. I have connections in this city that you cannot even imagine. When I am done with you, you will wish you had never crossed Linda Westbrook." The threats were being made in front of 16 witnesses, all of whom now understood exactly what kind of person Linda really was. But she was not finished destroying herself yet. What happened next would ensure that Linda's problems extended far beyond simple trespassing. Linda refused to leave. Instead of cutting her losses and walking away from the conference room, she planted herself in the chair and crossed her arms like a defiant child. "I am not going anywhere," she announced. "This meeting was called to address community concerns, and I represent this community. You cannot just throw me out because you do not like what I have to say." I remained calm, but I was already reaching for my phone. "Ms. Westbrook, I have asked you politely to leave. This is private property, and you are no longer welcome here. If you refuse to leave voluntarily, I will have to call security." "Go ahead and call security," she shouted. "I am not trespassing. I am here on official HOA business, representing the interests of hundreds of homeowners who are affected by this building's operations." The other people in the room were staring at her in amazement. Even they could see that Linda had completely lost touch with reality. She was doubling down on claims of authority that had just been thoroughly debunked, in front of witnesses, with legal documentation. But Linda was not finished. She pulled out her own phone and started dialing. "I am calling the police to report harassment and illegal eviction. This man is trying to silence me because I have been exposing his illegal business practices." My phone was already connecting to building security. "Tom, this is Marcus Thompson. I need you in conference room 3A immediately. We have a trespassing situation that may require police assistance." "Police assistance?" Linda laughed bitterly. "You are the one who is going to need police assistance when they find out about your fraud. Contractors do not just magically become building owners. Someone is going to investigate how you really got this property." She was making accusation after accusation, each one more serious than the last. But what Linda did not understand was that every word she spoke was being heard by 16 professional people who would remember exactly what she said and how she said it. "I know what this really is," Linda continued, her voice getting louder and more erratic. "This is retaliation because I have been exposing the code violations and safety issues in this building. You probably bribed someone to get fake ownership documents so you could silence me." Sarah Martinez looked terrified. Carlos was shaking his head in disbelief. The business representatives were pulling out their phones, probably to record what was happening in case they needed evidence later. Tom Rodriguez arrived with another security officer I did not recognize. Both men looked professional and calm, but I could see them assessing the situation carefully. "Tom," I said, "I am the managing partner of the ownership group for this building. I have asked Ms. Westbrook to leave the property, and she has refused. She is now making false accusations and disrupting a private business meeting." Linda jumped up from her chair. "Officers, this man is trying to illegally evict me from a public meeting. I am here on official HOA business, and I have every right to be in this building." Tom looked confused. "Ma'am, this is private property. If the owner has asked you to leave, you need to comply with that request." "He is not the real owner," Linda screamed. "This is fraud. I am filing a police report for harassment, illegal eviction, and business fraud." She was spiraling completely out of control now. What had started as a simple case of mistaken authority had become a public meltdown in front of multiple witnesses. "Ma'am," Tom said firmly, "I need you to calm down and come with me. We can sort this out downstairs." "I am not going anywhere with you." Linda backed away from the security officers. "I know my rights. This is discrimination against community leaders. I am calling my lawyer." That was when she made the decision that transformed her civil trespassing into criminal behavior. Instead of leaving with security, Linda grabbed her briefcase and threw it across the room, scattering papers everywhere and nearly hitting Sarah Martinez. "This is what happens when working-class people try to pretend they have power," she shouted. "You are all being conned by a fraud artist." The room erupted. Several people jumped up from their chairs. Tom and the other security officer moved quickly to restrain Linda before she could throw anything else or hurt someone. "I am calling 911, Tom announced. "This has escalated beyond a simple trespassing issue." As the police sirens approached the building 15 minutes later, Linda was still screaming about fraud and discrimination and illegal eviction. She had refused every opportunity to leave quietly and had instead chosen to make the situation as bad as possible for herself. What she did not realize was that her behavior was being documented by security cameras, witnessed by 16 professional people, and was about to become a matter of public record. Linda Westbrook had turned a simple case of mistaken identity into criminal charges, all because she could not accept that she had made a mistake. Officer Patricia Williams arrived with her partner, Officer James Chen. Both were experienced professionals who had clearly dealt with similar situations before. They listened carefully as Tom explained what had happened, then asked to speak with me privately to understand the ownership situation. I provided the officers with copies of all the legal documents, including the property deed, the LLC registration, and the building management contracts. Officer Williams reviewed everything carefully while her partner took statements from the witnesses who had observed Linda's behavior. "Mr. Thompson," Officer Williams said, "these documents appear to be in order. You are clearly the legal owner of this property, and you have the right to refuse access to anyone you choose." Meanwhile, Linda was still in the conference room, now surrounded by scattered papers and broken briefcase hardware. She had calmed down slightly, but she was still insisting that the entire situation was some kind of elaborate fraud. "Officers," she said when they returned to question her, "I want to file charges against this man for harassment, fraud, and illegal business practices. He has been posing as a building owner to silence my legitimate community concerns." Officer Chen looked at the legal documents, then back at Linda. "Ma'am, we have reviewed the ownership documentation, and it appears to be legitimate. Mr. Thompson is the legal owner of this building, and he has asked you to leave the property." "That is impossible," Linda insisted. "Contractors do not buy office buildings. Someone needs to investigate how he really acquired this property." "Ms. Westbrook," Officer Williams said patiently, "making false accusations is a serious matter. Do you have any actual evidence of fraud, or are you simply upset about being asked to leave?" Linda's face went through another series of expressions as she realized that the police were not going to arrest me for buying a building. Instead, they were beginning to focus on her behavior and her refusal to leave when asked. "I want to speak to your supervisor," she demanded. "This is clearly a case of discrimination against community leaders. I have rights that are being violated here." But her rights had already been explained to her multiple times. She had the right to leave the property voluntarily. She had chosen not to exercise that right. "Ma'am," Officer Chen said firmly, "you are being charged with trespassing, disturbing the peace, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent." The arrest was swift and professional. Linda continued protesting even as the handcuffs were applied, insisting that she was the victim of a conspiracy and that everyone in the room was lying to protect me. "This is not over," she shouted as Officer Williams escorted her toward the door. "I will have my lawyer contact the district attorney. Everyone will know what really happened here." But everyone already knew what had really happened. 16 witnesses had watched Linda claim authority she did not possess, refuse to leave private property when asked, make false accusations, and physically assault property by throwing her briefcase. The security cameras had recorded everything. After Linda was removed from the building, I addressed the remaining people in the conference room. The mood had shifted completely. Where there had been tension and fear, now there was relief and even some satisfaction. "I want to apologize that you all had to witness that," I said. "But I also want you to know that this building is now under new management, and this kind of harassment will not be tolerated." Sarah Martinez was the first to speak. "Mr. Thompson, I cannot tell you how good it felt to see someone finally stand up to her. She has been making life miserable for working people in this area for years." Carlos nodded in agreement. "She cost me 3 days of business with her fake health department complaints. I was afraid I was going to lose my permit." Over the next hour, I heard story after story of Linda's abuse of power. She had been systematically targeting anyone she perceived as beneath her social status, using her HOA position to intimidate and harass people who depended on community goodwill for their livelihood. But Linda's problems were just beginning. Within 48 hours, word of her arrest had spread throughout the Maple Heights community. The HOA board called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as president. Several of the businesses she had harassed came forward with additional complaints. The local newspaper ran a story about the incident, complete with quotes from witnesses. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from Linda's attorney requesting a meeting to discuss a settlement. She was facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits from multiple businesses, and the complete destruction of her reputation in the community. The woman who had built her identity around wielding power over others had lost everything because she could not treat a working person with basic respect. I also received something else that week, a personal letter from Linda herself. It was handwritten on plain paper, not the expensive letterhead she had used for her complaints. The letter was short and to the point. "Mr. Thompson, I understand now that my behavior was completely wrong. I have no excuse for how I treated you or the other people who work in your building. I am truly sorry for the pain I have caused. I hope that someday I can make amends for my actions." I never responded to the letter. Some apologies come too late, after too much damage has been done. Linda had spent years building a reputation as someone who would destroy anyone who crossed her. The consequences she was facing were not revenge, they were justice. 6 months later, the Pinnacle office complex was running more smoothly than it had in years. The new management policies I implemented created a respectful environment for everyone who worked there. Carlos's food truck became a permanent fixture in the parking lot. Sarah Martinez was promoted to head of building services. The harassment complaints dropped to 0. As for me, I learned something important about power and respect. Real authority comes from treating people with dignity, regardless of their position or social status. Linda Westbrook had tried to build power through intimidation and fear. In the end, that approach had destroyed her. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always comes. And sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing entitled people to face the natural consequences of their own terrible choices. The woman who thought she could fire me from my own building had learned the most expensive lesson of her life. I was not just a contractor who could be dismissed and forgotten. I was someone who had earned the right to stand up for everyone she had tried to tear down.